We're on track now. So thank you very much for joining us. My name's Alison Airy. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of ACBC New South Wales, and we're really delighted to be doing this event with our colleagues in the Victoria branch. So hello to all of you. And this is a very timely event that we're doing about new regulations being brought in China affecting animal testing, a greatly anticipated change in regulations. And today we'll talk about what that means and also importantly, what it doesn't mean. So it'll be a very practical examination of the issue. We're really pleased to be partnering with Wood Mallesons, who bring great expertise in this area to the webinar today. And we thank them for working with us on this webinar and for their ongoing support for ACBC. So in terms of the format today, we'll hear from Mark Schaub, who will give us an overview of the policy and regulatory changes. We're then delighted to have someone from the industry, Christina Su from Bayeco, who'll talk to us about what it means from the perspective of a producer. And then we'll hear from Edwina Kwan, also from KWM, to talk about more of the practical elements of what this regulation means. We will have a panel session after we hear the three presentations. I'll ask some questions of the speakers, and we'll also give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you have. So we'll be doing it via the, is it the Q&A function, Zach, that we'll be using, or is it the chat function for questions?
Q&A function would be best.
Chat function as well. Say hi to others on the webinar. That'd be really great too. So without further ado, I'll introduce our first speaker, Mark Schaub, who's a senior partner with Wood Mallesons. He's got a specialisation in FDI and M&A, particularly cross-border with China, and has in fact had so much experience in doing deals across the border with China that he's actually responsible for $20 billion worth of investment, which is incredible. Great China expertise, from concerns relating to the small player in Japan, as well as obviously the largest players in the market. So Mark, I'll hand over to you to give your presentation.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Zach, can we share the screen? Oh, great. Okay, so I think, today I'll give a very quick 10-minute summary of where we're with animal testing in China, what it was like in the past and where we're right now and what's coming up in the next years. So next slide, please. Okay, so next slide, please. So I think basically it's, oh, I think we went a bit too far. So I think, basically animal testing on cosmetics was perhaps the largest single Chinese non-trade barrier that really frustrated foreign companies. And so before 2014, regardless of what kind of cosmetic product you were selling in China, whether it was produced in China or it was imported into China, you needed to do animal testing. And the animal testing is in great detail. It'll specify what kind of tests are required to be carried out. Then in June 2014, and as Alison mentioned, it's been a much waited for change. I think my first article about the end of animal testing was from 2002. So we've been thinking something would happen for a long time. 2014, they opened up a little bit an exemption for non-special use cosmetics. So not special use cosmetics are things that really have an effect on the human body. So skin whitening, bleach, perm, these kind of sunscreen. So these are special use. So it's only about 6 or 7 categories. Non-special use is everything else, moisturizers, lipstick, all those kind of things. So there was an exemption from animal testing for domestically manufactured products. And this was used by companies like Avon and Dove, who were not cruelty-free, but wanted to become cruelty-free. So they started manufacturing in China to avoid animal testing. And then in February 2021, there's been a big change of the law, which overhauled the cosmetic laws, which have been largely in place since 1989. So, the Berlin Wall was still up when China had its last major cosmetics law. And so starting January 1, 2021, new laws came in. Next slide, please. Okay, and so now where we are is basically starting from May the 1st, international cosmetic companies can apply to sell imported non-special use cruelty-free cosmetics in mainland China, and they can do it through general import and general trade. And so I think in the media, you might see this as China has now said no animal testing. However, there's two very big prerequisites. So one of them is QMS, which is similar to GMP. And this means that firstly, if you want to import a non-special use cosmetic, the manufacturer of that cosmetic overseas will need to get a certification of the manufacturing quality system. So it's similar to GMP for pharmaceuticals, but the Chinese authorities are using the term QMS. And this raises a number of issues. One of the issues is, not many countries have a similar system to China where they certify that a cosmetic is safe to be used. So I think Australia does not have such a certification process, and very few countries do. So two of the front runners in getting recognized are France and Spain. And so what France has done, they have actually created a government certification process that mirrors the Chinese process. So that will make things easier for their manufacturers. And Spain has supposedly entrusted a third party, like an ISO type organization to issue a certification. So I don't think we know yet who will be recognized, but it's important to notice that firstly, you need the certification and it will have to be recognized by the Chinese NMPA. So that'll be a big block for many countries going forward. I think the rumors are that the ones who will probably be certified in the first batch will be Japan, Korea, France, and Spain, possibly Italy. And then the second step is a product safety assessment. That it can be actually that the product is safe without having animal testing. This is probably not such a big issue because, like I just mentioned, since 2014, there's been a domestic exemption. And so the product safety assessment is pretty clear. Next slide, please. So I think, the exemption is subject to exceptions. So I think we shouldn't look at this as saying animal testing is no longer required in China. It's more like animal testing is required, but you can avoid it and import cosmetics if you meet the non-special use, the QMS, and the safety assessment. However, in addition, this exemption will not be possible for products which have claims which relate to children or infants. And then number two, which will be quite a big barrier, is that the product can't contain any new cosmetic raw material or new ingredients which are still under the safety monitoring period. Now, Chinese authorities have thousands of products and raw materials which are allowed to be used. But in the cosmetic industry, I think one of the things which is used as either a marketing or as a R&D edge are new ingredients. So this could affect many companies as well who are trying to bring something new to the market. And then thirdly, I don't think it will affect anybody here, but if you, the manufacturer or your responsible agent, is under supervision, so you're on the watch list. But as I say, I don't think many of the companies looking in today will be in that category. Next slide, please. So we made this flow chart just to make it a bit easy to understand how it will work. And so the first question is, do you want to be cruelty-free? And I guess Christina will talk a bit about the importance of that for foreign brands. So some people say no, and I don't know why they're on the presentation today, but many of the cosmetic companies do want to be cruelty-free. And I guess the real first big question is, are you comfortable with post-market testing? So it's also important to note This exemption is just to import the product and sell it. But in case of a recall or a danger to public health, it doesn't mean that the Chinese authorities will not do post-market testing. But this is not different from the USA or other places, but there are cruelty-free organizations who would say that that is not cruelty-free. So if you are not comfortable with that, then you might only be able to do cross-border e-commerce. And it's worth noting there are some cruelty-free organizations like the Anti-Vivisection Authority in the US, who does not consider that to be cruelty-free, and also some beauty bloggers. Now, if you are comfortable with post-market testing, and I think people don't think it happens very often, we've never found a case in the last 10 years of post-market testing. The question is whether it's non-special use. Sorry, that slide, I don't know if the slide can be easily read. It's a bit like a color blindness test in places. But if your product is non-special use, like I said, sunscreen, skin whitening, then again, the only way that you can, export to China is through cross-border e-commerce. Now, if it's non-special use, you've got two possibilities. One, which I'll go is the simpler one just very quickly. You could domestically manufacture in the PRC. So you could do a joint venture under the animal testing exception, or you could do a white label or processing agreement with a Chinese partner, contract manufacturing with the animal testing exception, or you could even set up your own manufacturing. A lot of companies have set up number 2 or 3. Like I said, Avon's a famous case, and also Dove. Now, if you don't want to do the domestic manufacturing, and I think a lot of companies in cosmetics, they do, wish to stress very much the heritage of their product. So they might want to import. And so then the big question will be, is the country of manufacturer, does it have a QMS certification recognized by the PRC NMPA? If yes, well, then you can do the product safety assessment, and then you can import. And those imports will not be limited to cross-border e-commerce. You can go and do normal e-commerce. You can do sales in Sephora, Mecca, whatever you want to do. So that would really open up the market a lot. If you do not have that, you have the option of the cross-border e-commerce, something like Tmall Global. But that's a limited market. Tmall is much bigger than Tmall Global. And then if you have offline, it's bigger still. You could do the local manufacturing exception I just mentioned. Or thirdly, and this might be for some companies, possible, especially if their manufacturing base is not able to get the certification, would be to outsource the production to a country that's recognized. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does this mean for you? I think, very quickly, if you do have multiple manufacturing sites, and we got there South Korea, Japan, and France, because these are the countries most likely to be in the first batch of countries that will be recognized by the Chinese market, which you would not think any of those 3 would be the forefront of animal liberation rights. But anyway, so be it. That may mean that if you have the possibility to produce in one of those countries and you prefer to do that than manufacturing in China, you may decide to actually outsource some of your manufacturing. If you had manufacturing in South Korea and France, then you'd have to do this QMS and this safety assessment for both of those manufacturing sites. Next slide, please. Yeah, so distribution, just very quickly, I think the big thing is cross-border e-commerce is not the same as being able to sell in physical stores, general trade, and Tmall Global is not the same as Tmall. We did an acquisition recently of a US company's local distribution business. And so, Tmall Global accounted for a lot of their spend, but only 2% of their sales. The other 98% was Tmall, JD.com, Little Red Book, and these other things. So, I think one of the things is Tmall Global is good just to test the waters, but if you really want to get sales volumes, you need to get onshore. So this is why this is an important change for people. Next slide, please. Okay, outsourcing to China, I think, you know, the big guys were transferring their manufacturing to China under the limited animal testing exemption. This will no longer be required. I think the other thing is now, a lot of people thought that Hong Kong was necessary, but I think this really means Hong Kong is separate. And so probably less and less people will use Hong Kong as a gateway to China. Next slide, please. Okay, just very briefly, I just mentioned at the start that this was this big overhaul since 1989 of the new laws that just came in. So, you know, when China opens the window, it often also slams the door shut on your fingers. So it's important to note that cosmetic companies wanting to come in are going to face much stricter regulations, much improved health and safety standards, and there'll be much more liability. So, you know, until now, it's been pretty loosey-goosey. The domestic representative hasn't faced liability, I don't think. So I think, you know, if you're going to enter the China market, be aware that it'll be much stricter. Secondly, you know, there is the potential that as things go forward, similar to infant formula, the Chinese authorities may wish to carry out inspections on manufacturing sites. And I think I've already mentioned the recognition of QMS. This may be a problem for Australia, because Australia, probably not a big secret for people on the call today, is not perhaps flavour of the month with China. Next slide, please, Zach. Okay, that was me. Well, thanks very much, Alison, and I'll hand it back to Alison.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Mark. And I loved your slides, the way you superimposed your message on makeup. That was fantastic. So I'm sure people have lots of questions as a result of the presentation. Please just either hold them up or by all means put them down in the Q&A function and we'll get to them. But what we'll do now is we'll introduce Christina Su to speak. Christina's co-founder of Bayeco, which is a clean skincare brand, which was launched 2.5 years ago in the result of a gap that was identified in the market for natural, effective skincare products for busy women. She has launched her product into Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Thailand, but of course, China is missing from that list at the moment. So, Christina, I'll hand the floor over to you. It'd be good to hear about your product, your journey as a company, and also what these future changes might mean for your business.
Thank you so much for that, Alison. Thank you for the introduction. So today is going to be more like a coffee conversation between you and I. I don't have any slides, and I'm just going to tell you about my story, about my journey of what I've gone through in terms of cruelty-free international, in terms of trying to get into China without any animal testing. So as mentioned with Alison, I have a product that is, it's pharmacist formulated, so I formulated it. There was definitely a need for clean skincare that was effective. And so we went into this. I've got a business partner. She's got very strong ties in China. And so from the very beginning, you know, our product was presented as clean, green, and Australian made and effective. And so from the very beginning, because my business partner had pretty strong ties with China, we knew that going into China was one of our strategies of trying to expand our brand. And so we knew the opportunity was huge. She's always said to me, if we stick with only e-commerce business, it wasn't going to be, it was as what Mark said, you know, with the company that they acquired, there was only a 2%, you know, market with Tmall Global. And so she knew this. And so she said, you know, let's try and get our products into China. One of the dilemmas I had was, of course, as with most Australian brands, when you decide to go into China, doing animal testing is going to jar very badly with the rest of the world. And being a clean and green brand, it really didn't sit very nicely with the brand. It really felt like I had to choose between China and the rest of the world. Do I pick China, or do I pick America, or do I pick China and pick, you know, Korea and other companies that really, you know, other audiences that really didn't want to see a clean brand enter into China and have animal testing. And so that was the dilemma that we had from the beginning. when we first launched Bayeco. And the other problem as well that I had was, as I researched into it, I have my business partner, I had spoken to many Chinese people. I had also spoken to some of our colleagues who are fresh from China, and I asked them what they thought about animal testing. And, you know, the majority of the answer that I had was actually they liked animal testing. They thought it was something that was important, because they said, you know, if it's using on my face, I want to make sure that it's been tested on animals. And so in effect, testing on animals is a selling point to the Chinese people. And so that was really unusual. I just thought, well, this is something very new that I hadn't heard before. So at that point in time, we were still making a decision. And I think for me, I felt very strongly that I didn't want to put all my eggs in the one basket and only, you know, do animal testing, focus on China. I wanted to make sure that we kept our product diversified. We were quite lucky, and it's been a real journey. We were approached by Cruelty Free International during our research in 2018. So just as we were launching, Cruelty Free International approached us and asked us if we wanted to be one of the pilot brands to bring our brand into China, going through Cruelty Free. And I thought, that's the answer. This is it. This is what I really wanted. I wanted something that was also, you know, that wasn't animal tested. We can open up to China. The rest of the world will be okay, because, you know, we've got the logo on our brand. And so for me, it was music to my ears. I thought, this is it. This is it. This is what we needed to do. There were two criteria that we found that in our journey. And so the first thing, in order to have it as Cruelty Free International. So Cruelty Free International is a body in the UK that, you know, they put a logo on your product, and they've got a certain criteria. So one of the things is to have it into China, we needed to manufacture our products in China. So there was no options to that. We had to make sure we manufacture the products in China. So it meant that the Chinese authorities would look at our product like a locally made product. And then the second thing we needed to do was to get cruelty-free letter declarations from each and every one of the companies and ingredients that we've had. Now, I've only got 6 products, and I still had to ask for letters for over 30 companies. And that has been a challenge. So this was 3 years ago. And so when we started this, what I had to do was I had to write to each of the company. So I'd speak to the sales representative, and then I'd go from the sales representative who would say to me, I'll speak to the regulatory department, who would needed to speak to the right people in that department. And then, you know, if the company is really big, often my request is at the very bottom of the pile. And so then a few weeks, few months later, they come back with the letter. And the problem is Cruelty Free International needed the wording of the letter to be exactly to how they want it. So even if a particular wording is slightly off, they would reject it. And so then I would have to go back again. And the process was like this, back and forth. It was like a part-time job, having to go back and forth, getting this letter. And then on top of that, what I found was every letter had to be renewed every year. And so we had gotten 98% of the letters, and it was ready to go. I just had one more letter to go. And then they said, no, we have to renew all the other letters again. And so I had to start the process all over again from the beginning, as if I had done nothing. And so again, having to go through that process. So it's been very, very frustrating. Even to date, there is still one company, and this will be our second renewal with them. They really haven't responded to us because they said it's irrelevant. I don't understand why this needs to be done on a yearly basis. Further to this, we've already done 3 other letters, which has been rejected. So they get really frustrated, and it just makes it really hard for us. So that's been the dilemma that we've had. Being a small company as well, I think the other dilemma is that even though I'm Chinese, I don't speak a word of Chinese. And so it makes it so hard for me to actually research further, to find out more information of how we can get it across the line. And so there are several sort of setbacks that we've had. From this, I found that because I was so adamant that we wanted to do it via cruelty-free or via not animal testing, there has been an opportunity cost, because we have been approached by companies asking if we wanted to sell it to 2,000 stores. Once we get it registered, we can sell it, because one of our products are also safe for pregnancy. When I formulated it for that reason too. So there's a huge market and people saying, look, I'm waiting for you to sell it into China. And so the opportunity cost for us is big. Having to go on down this avenue meant that we haven't been able to sell it offline into China. I still have my fingers crossed. I think it's going to happen. I'm not going to give up. There has to be ways. We learn from our mistakes. There's always ways around things. So I'm still very hopeful that this is going to happen. And with what Mark has said, it gives me another avenue possibly to bring our products across into China. And so that's been my journey so far with trying to get this product across the line, sell it into China, and that's been so far my journey. So hopefully you found this interesting. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Christina. I think that was a really good example of the complexity in this area. 30 letters taking you 3 years. But also I think you highlighted the opportunity there. I mean, offers to be placed in 2,000 stores in China, that's absolutely huge. So these regulations really could have very major implications moving forward. So thank you for that presentation. We will we'll move on to Edwina Kwan now, who will give us a bit of a more of a description of the practical implications of these regulatory changes for Australian business. Christina is also a partner with KWM, and she is in the disputes resolution practice. She's got a specialisation in cross-border disputes between Australia and China, and she's represented clients in a range of different dispute forums, including arbitrations, mediations, IP-related disputes. So I will now hand over to Edwina. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks everyone for joining. I lived in China, in Beijing, for about 5 years, and I remember when I first got there around 2010 and walking around these big department stores, particularly the cosmetics section of those stores, and they were just empty, like you could hear a pin drop. There were huge stores and there was no one in them. And then I remember going back, I regularly go back for work, and being in Sanlitun in Beijing and walking around a Sephora there, and it was just packed. And, that would have been a sort of a 10-year period. And so the demand for these types of products, I mean, just from my sort of layperson's view, has been really interesting to watch. I think when we're looking at what opportunities exist for Australian businesses, I think it's important just to sort of keep in mind the context of what we're talking about here. So I think it's important to note that there's just the sheer volume of competition in terms of international products trying to enter this market. I mean, I think of late there's been, Baltic and Nordic states there, countries there increasingly becoming interested in this market. Spain, you're competing against traditional brands, obviously all the, the French cosmetic houses, brands from the US, Europe, Japan, who and a lot of Japanese products I know even sold here in Mecca in Australia are really high demand, expensive products, Korea and the US. And I think Mark touched on it too in terms of the increase in the regulatory oversight that these products are going to see now as a result of these new changes. So I think it's going to be slower than we think in terms of the way that this will move forward. Chinese, like the infant formula issues, are very strict on regulation, particularly, as Christina said, you're putting it on your face. They don't want to have similar issues with these products. So, it's likely to take at least a sort of 12 to 18 month period to really sort of roll out. And obviously, as Mark referred to, it's going to be in preference for countries that get this certification in the first place. So I think Australian businesses, although it's a great opportunity, we just need to be mindful of the way that it will play out. And I'm going to talk about more some practical steps and recommendations in terms of navigating this sort of new regulatory regime. But I think obviously, you know, we've seen in the past that these things, some free trade zones might start to implement some of these issues before others. So keep an eye on that. I think also in terms of context, we should also remember that as part of China's latest 14th five-year plan, there is an emphasis on dual circulation. There is an emphasis on local Chinese brands. There's quite a good video on YouTube circulating at the moment, proudly made in China, and it actually refers to quite a lot of these cosmetic brands. So for anyone interested in seeing how local Chinese brands are dealing with this industry, that's a good one to watch. But you know, the focus is on growing local Chinese brands, promoting sort of national champions. So I think the motivation to roll these rules out may be slow going, but look, this is just, for what it's worth, observations from the sideline. I think there's also, you know, there's a lot of lack of details in some of the regs, so in the changes. So, you know, they've announced these changes, but we'll see how they play out, you know, in reality. But so yeah, look, there's this increase of support for local brands. That's not to say that there's not opportunities. I think as part of that, China's the most recent 5-year plan, there is an emphasis on green, natural, clean brands, and that obviously plays to that. Australian companies, despite the political tensions and the current status of the relationship, are still doing well. I think obviously sort of fast-moving consumer goods may not be seen as strategically important as sort of iron ore or some of these agricultural issues. So some of the feedback we've had is that, you know, Chinese aren't that worried about where the brand is coming from in terms of cosmetic brands, etc. And I think just on that clean, green, you know, we're seeing a lot of Australian businesses still doing really well in terms of, you know, sales into China, and, you know, huge growth in terms of international health and beauty items in the Chinese market. So there is opportunity there. I think it's just important to know the market and know what you're dealing with. And it's a big, huge, complex market, so you need to do your homework. I guess the reality of this sort of political overlay is that, as Mark said, there's a preference as to which countries will get the certification first, and Australia may not be high on the priority list. And I guess the key thing to keep in mind is that, you know, if you are going to be selling these, you know, cruelty-free products into China, that, you know, you obviously China requires the QMS certification to be issued by a body in the country of manufacturer. So that's a point that Mark made in terms of, you know, considering options. If you want to get into the market quicker, you might consider manufacturing in a different country. If made in Australia is part of your brand selling point, then obviously you might need to consider those issues. Next slide, please. I think just in terms of practical steps of how Australian companies can take opportunities to maximise, steps they can take to maximise opportunities in this market. Obviously know the laws, that's something we can help you with, but you know, there's IP issues. China has a first to file system, you know, so you need to know, you know, what trademarks you want to file. You need to ensure that you can get those trademarks. You don't want to do huge branding, marketing exercises to realise that somebody else has already got that name or a very similar name. Obviously, quality, health, safety, regulation, you know, huge burden, as Christina said, in terms of paperwork. And that's likely to probably just increase with this certification and the QMS, etc. As Mark said, inspections of factories is something that's been highlighted, and navigating this political aspect is another issue. Customs as well, you know, in some cases, you know, you can pay people to do clearance for you if you're doing that cross-border e-commerce side of things, but you've got to make sure that your price point takes into account all of these increased costs that you may have to deal with. Another thing, know the players. So we've talked a lot about e-commerce platforms that you can sell on. Tmall Global obviously, you know, allows international businesses to sell without having to have all this certification. As Mark and others have mentioned, you know, the reality is that the audience for those types of products is much smaller than on Tmall. Also, if you're going to be selling on Tmall Global, you still have to have, you know, a $25,000 security deposit, and you've also got to have an Alipay account. You've got to think about business licenses, bank accounts, all this sort of stuff. And so that's something that you need to consider as well in terms of, you know, actually setting your business up to take advantage of these platforms. I think another key issue that we would recommend is just knowing the market and the customer. And I think, you know, as I said before, Chinese consumers are very savvy. They're highly sophisticated. They have a huge amount of information available to them. And in the context of skincare and beauty, they're looking for brands that have a strong reputation outside of China for reliability and safety, quality. They are looking for products that are marketing themselves in an authentic and accessible way. Social media is huge, live streaming, you know, offering VIP deals and specials and all this sort of stuff. If you want to be competitive, you need a KOL, you need to be, you know, basically adapting your product to the market in which you're selling. And it's a very dynamic, changing market, huge emphasis on tech in terms of selling. And so you need to basically be aware of all of these aspects, I think, in order to be competitive. I think you need to also label and package your products in a way that's obviously consistent with your identity, your brand, etc. And just lastly, I mean, I think, you know, all of us are navigating this Australia-China sort of relationship at the moment. We don't think, you know, we're still advising our clients that there's plenty of opportunity in China. And I think that goes without saying in terms of this market and this and in terms of skincare and beauty. I think, you know, just be aware of what's happening and what this new regulatory regime will present in terms of opportunities. But I think, you know, thinking of other options and being flexible in terms of having an Australian product is something that you should think about. And I think in terms of the long-term play, how you want to position your brand and whether or not you want to get a foot in the market as soon as possible, that might mean having a cruelty-free product that may be manufactured somewhere else or partnering up, as Mark said, to manufacture in China. I think you just need to consider all your options. But it is a very different market. It's exciting. There's opportunity, and look, you know, we deal with these issues daily in our business. We've just advised a big Chinese company in relation to their participation in the e-commerce market, and I think, if anything, that case has sort of highlighted to us that, you know, you just have to be aware and have a detailed understanding of what's required to succeed in the Chinese market and have sufficient resources to sort of drive local engagement. But plenty of opportunity and yeah, interesting and welcome changes in terms of these regulations. That's it from me. I might pass it back to you, Alison.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. It was a really practical examination of all the issues involved, from the legal to the marketing issues, and touched on the political relationship there as well. So thank you very much. So we'll move to the Q&A session now. So now it's your opportunity to get the benefit of the expertise that we have on the line. So have your questions ready. But I guess I'll start with the $64 million question. When are these regulations likely to apply to Australia? When are we likely to get certification recognised, or is it just too imponderable at the moment? And who would be our certifying agency? Have there been any moves for one body or other to put up their hand to take on this role?
Is that for me or?
Well, for I guess our lawyers initially, yes.
So I don't know. Well, mate, I'll have a stab at that one. Look, I think it's pretty clear. I had an off-the-record discussion with some of the Australian embassy people, and they say they have no discussions with the Chinese authorities. So it's very unlikely they're going to be in the first few batches. And I think, in the last few days, things have ratcheted up a bit. So I would really say this is not going to happen anytime soon. So I think one should dissuade oneself. What would be interesting is, I haven't heard it about Australia, but in the US, because there's also a bit of a complex relationship there, but I would say it's not perhaps as same level of animosity at the moment. It seemed, but America's a big lumbering beast, and like Australia is a federal system, and it seems that the Americans, there are some states who are trying to progress their own certification. And I guess, similar to Australia, they don't have like a government body that does it. So I imagine in both cases, there would be a outside certification body, and they would do something. They'd be recognized by, say, the Australian government or the state government, similarly to the Americans. I heard a rumor that it might be Illinois and New Jersey looking at doing that. So that could be something. And, I think you said you're doing it together with Victoria today. And Victoria is, I guess, well known for perhaps doing things differently from the rest of the federal states. So maybe Victoria will be a trailblazer in this regard.
Fantastic. Well, let's hope that anything they do isn't ripped up either. So I'll ask a bit of a market-based question now. Firstly, to Christina. So you weren't selling via general trade, but were you selling via e-commerce into the Chinese market? And what sort of consumer response did you have from from consumers for your product?
So we were selling it online into China. So my business partner has a Tmall global store, so we were selling into that. And she has, basically she's a distributor into China. So she has many channels in there. We have very good feedback with our products. And so, it's been good, but, we know that it's like a drop in the ocean of what we're actually capable of. But the response has been good. Generally speaking, I think Chinese people do like Australian products. Maybe it's no longer a flavor of the month, as what Mark has said. It's definitely been harder last year and this year. And I think because it's, they're starting to turn away from the Australians. I'm not sure. I'm feeling that. We're definitely seeing that in the data, but they still do like Australian products. It is still something that, we've noticed. It's just that it's, it might hopefully be a temporary thing. I don't know.
Yeah, we certainly do have a very good reputation in the Chinese market. So long may that remain. It was interesting that you said that some of the Chinese people you asked said that they wanted products to be tested on animals. But I wonder whether this might change moving forward and that there might be more of a cruelty-free movement in China. And also whether it's likely that Chinese companies might step into this space as well and market themselves as not tested on animals and cruelty-free.
I think as they open up the idea of not testing on animals, they will start educating their customers as well, how this is actually okay. Because I think in the past, I get this impression that, perhaps on WeChat and on articles, they've been educated that actually you want to have an animal tested, that the rest of the world, they don't really talk about the rest of the world, but they talk about their own products and they say, you want to have it tested because this is how you know that it's safe on your face. So that's how they've been educated to see skincare and many other products that it's actually good to have an animal tested. So I think once they re-educate and once they open up this cruelty-free option, I think, they would be educated that actually we don't need this. And I think they will slowly be more open to the idea of not having animal testing on skincare. products for sure. Yeah, it's just an education thing, I think.
So it sounds like a role for the companies themselves to, when they send in their products, so accompany that with some consumer education.
Definitely.
I've got a question about for all of the panel members about what you think this is for the future of Chinese consumer policy, because it's a very positive direction for policy to take. It's opening up China to international firms. It's disappointing that Australia might not be among the ranks of the first to take advantage of this, but I am encouraged by the direction of the regulations. So either the lawyers or Christina, do you have any views on this?
Maybe could we ask Mark and see what he thinks of the question? I think, yeah, I don't really have much to say. So let's see what Mark has to say about this question.
Okay, you're putting me under pressure, Christina.
I am putting you under pressure.
Well, I think the thing is, if you look at all the regulations and the strictening, make it more strict and more difficult, I think, people will be sad by my answer, but I think for the smaller and medium-sized companies, I don't think import's going to be a big business. It's going to be as illusory as the cross-border e-commerce. It'll be yet another, thing which they'll spend years trying to get. Because I think if you look at the regulations, and I won't go into detail because it will take too long, but there's a lot of requirements for responsible agents. So I think for companies who are, not massive, probably they will do some of the production of some of the materials in China, and we'll have to see what the threshold is of what is domestic manufacturing, but probably then have a trusted partner to do the production in China without animal testing. And I think that's the future, because China's not really keen about, importing lots of imported cosmetics. They want to build their own cosmetic industry. And, if you look at the biggest sellers now, it's things like this Perfect Diary, and there's massive Chinese cosmetic companies. And I think the other thing you'll see is probably these Chinese cosmetic companies will acquire brands overseas and then localize the production in China as well. So I think for the Australian companies, they'll have to think, do I want to be in China? Somebody's got to do all the work. Maybe it's better to have a trusted distributor who can fulfill the requirements rather than me spending 80% of my time chasing this, market. Because somebody has to actually put boots on the ground and do all this. It's not easy, so I think that's it. And, just one last point on the cruelty-free pilot project that Christina was talking about, basically, at least last time when I looked at it, you could just bring in the stuff, do some mixing and bottle it. And that was enough to pass, at least at that time, the domestic manufacturing threshold. So one has to look at it a bit, in a nuanced approach. You happy with that answer, Christina?
Very good, thank you.
Mark, I was interested in your presentation that you mentioned that one of the exceptions was cosmetics for children. What would that cover, I guess, skincare for children, because you don't normally associate cosmetics with children?
I think it's just about the claims. So I think if you make a claim on your product that this is especially good for children, or, who knows, they might even have claims like this moisturizer will boost your 6-year-old child's IQ or something. So you have to have a claim that's directed to infants or children. Shampoo, I guess, that's the most obvious one where we have a claim for children.
Now, in terms of the first batch of companies to achieve certification, you said the rumours were, I think, Japan, Korea, Spain, France. I wondered where New Zealand sat within this. Has there been any discussion of New Zealand, because its relationship with China is obviously quite different from ours at the moment, and it's a close partner of ours, and I know some companies are talking about manufacturing in New Zealand because of the issues they're currently confronting at the border in China?
I haven't heard anything about New Zealand. So we heard something about Italy, but it's really those countries you mentioned, possibly Italy, maybe Germany, but that's the extent of it. I think, when you talk to other people and you're just collecting rumors, so this is nothing official, that's what the feedback is.
Alison, I'm aware that New Zealand is kind of, well, as Mark said, from the rumours, being a beneficiary of the current Australia-China relationship. I think there's a company, Etique, that's recently entered the Chinese market. They're a kind of green kind of skincare brand or something like that. And I think, for what it's worth, their comments were that the sort of hurdles and regulatory and sort of manufacturing infrastructure logistical issues sort of have been worth the benefits. But it's hard to know. I'm not sure whether or not they're at the top of the list for reaching certification, but they're definitely more in favour than we are at the moment. I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. What I might do is just ask each of our panelists to give one last short piece of advice or key takeout you'd like to provide, and then we might have to bring the session to an end. So I guess in order of the speaking, Mark, what would be your one comment to leave with the audience?
So I think I might be repeating myself a little bit, but I think the issue would be, there are these requirements, so it is not so difficult. And I think with Christina's story, it was more cruelty-free international putting barriers rather than the Chinese authorities. It is doable. And, we often tie ourselves up in knots by looking for, shadows where there are no shadows. So I would suggest that one can sometimes also just do a more direct way and simplify the approach.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a bit like the IP regime. People assume it's too hard, but actually it's pretty simple. You've just got to follow the rules that the Chinese authorities put in place, and then you're in a good position. Christina.
I think similar to what Mark is saying, now in hindsight, what I think would be better is to actually lay out all of your options in front of you and to research about it and to try and find as many avenues as you possibly can. Or if going into China without animal testing is what you're looking for, then to actually look at all the options that you have available in front of you, weigh up the pros and cons for each before embarking into it. Because whichever way you go, there's going to be time involved and there's going to be a process involved. And so you want to make sure that you get there as quick as possible in the least resistant way, I guess. Because whatever way you embark, it's generally quite a long journey. It does take months in order for you to get it into China in this way.
Yeah. And Edwina.
I think similar to what Christina said, you've got to do your homework. You've got to know the market before you dive into it. And I, for one, have been involved in a lot of disputes where people have partnered with the wrong JV partner, or they've, started selling into the market without knowing the IP rules, etc., and they get themselves into a lot of trouble. So, do your DD up front and try to avoid those things later on down the line.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think we've had a really good introduction to the issues and a really realistic picture of what they mean. So I really want to thank our speakers from King & Wood Mallesons, and also Christina for sharing your story. I'm going to Google your product and I'm going to buy some. It sounds fantastic. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. I'm sure if you have further questions that our speakers would be happy to answer them. If you'd like to email them through. Now, Zach, we just have a poll that we want to send around quickly. If you wouldn't mind just launching that for people. This is just so we get a bit of feedback ourselves for the type of content that we're putting out there, and has an opportunity and gives us an opportunity to give our members the types of events that there's strong demand for. But thank you once again, everybody, for your time. I've really enjoyed working with our Victorian colleagues as well in putting this event together. Of course, technology gives us a great, gives us the tools to do that. So we're really pleased to have that opportunity as well. Stay tuned for further events coming your way. Of course, both New Zealand and New Zealand, I've got New Zealand on the brain now, New South Wales and Victoria have a program of events coming up, both webinars and in-person events now, which is very exciting. So stay tuned for that. And we look forward to continuing to see you at future events.